If you're taking the December 6th SAT, here's exactly what I think is coming. I'm Carson, an SAT tutor who helps students raise their SAT scores fast, and here are the 10 question types I'm certain you'll see on test day. My first prediction is that you're going to see a clause transition clause question in the grammar section. So these are a tougher grammar problem, and they almost occur on every test, and you guys should be prepared for it. How you recognize these is you look at the answer choices. They're the only grammar question where you can see a transition within it. So you can see punctuation surrounding the transition, though. And usually it's a disagreeing transition like that, like but, though, however. So you want to know how to answer these because it's very likely it's going to show up on your exam. Here's how. When you recognize that you're answering a clause, transition, clause question, you want to do the first step. You want to determine, is the clause before the punctuation a full sentence or not? And is the clause after the punctuation a full sentence or not? That'll tell you what punctuation to use to separate them. So the first step is determine the punctuation. The second step is to determine where should the transition go. So let's go ahead and do the first step. Let's take a look at the clause before the punctuation. Such interpretations are ultimately speculative. Speculative goes with the first clause because it's before the punctuation in all four answer choices. So such interpretations are ultimately speculative, period. That's a full sentence. So we know that it goes full sentence. So let's take a look at another clause after the punctuation. In this case, we ignore the transition because the transition is not going to be a part of the clause. The object's gray coloration may be an incidental effect of radiation, solar wind, collisions, and other objects rather than evidence of its physical makeup. That for sure is a full sentence. So we know that we have two full sentences side by side, and a comma can never separate two full sentences. But we know a semicolon can separate two full sentences. In fact, that's all it does. So we know that A cannot be correct, and we know that D cannot be correct. So we must choose between B and C. And that leads us to step 2, where we have to determine which clause should have the transition. For B, we know that the first clause will have the transition. If we choose C, though comes after the semicolon, meaning that the second clause has the transition. What this means is whichever clause has the transition, that is meant to indicate that that clause disagrees with the clause that came before it. So I want to look at the clauses before and after the punctuation, and I want to ask myself, do they agree with each other? Do they talk and expand upon the same topic? Or do they disagree with each other and offer conflicting views? Let's take a look. So such interpretations are ultimately speculative. The object's gray coloration may be an incidental effect of radiation, solar wind, collisions with other objects, rather than evidence of its physical makeup. This is telling me that these actually agree with each other. So the idea is that these interpretations are speculative. We don't actually know what happened. Then the clause that comes after that says it could be because of radiation, solar wind, or collisions, a whole bunch of reasons. So that means they actually expand upon the same idea and agree and emphasize the same ideas between each other. So since they agree with each other, I know that the answer cannot be C and it must be B. B is the correct answer for this question. Next, I think you're going to see a tricky percentage problem, so you need to know your open formulas. Here's how to solve every single percentage problem you'll see on the test. You want to use the open formulas. The open formulas are formulas you should be using for every percentage problem. Here's how they work. Whenever you see percent of in the question, you want to use this formula. Old, so your old number or initial number, times the percent equals your new number. And so whenever you see percent increase, decrease, you want to do this. Your old number times 1 plus or minus percent equals the new number. By following this formula, you know exactly where to place every single number on a percents problem, and when you follow it, it's very hard to get these wrong. Let's use it for this question. A reseller buys certain books for a purchase price of $5 each, and then marks them for each for sale at a consumer price that is 270% of the purchase price. So that percent of tells me I'm going to use this first formula here. So let's go ahead and write it. What's our old number or the number we started with? We know it's going to be $5 because that's our initial value. Since we know it's percent of, we're going to directly multiply it by the percent. In this case, it's 270%, but we're going to want it as a decimal. We're going to have to move that decimal over 2 to get 2.7. And that's going to equal our new number. But before we solve, let's take a look at that second equation. After 4 months, any remaining books not yet sold are marked at a discount price that is 70% off the consumer price. Now, would that be an increase or decrease? Well, of course, it would be a decrease. So we know we're going to use our second formula, percent increase decrease. So we're going to take this value, so in this case it would be O, and we would multiply it by 70% off. So 1 minus 0.7, and that would equal our new number. In this case, I know that this n is going to be this O, so let's go ahead and do it. 5 times 2.7 is going to be equaling 13.5, and so we want to plug in 13.5 here, and then multiply by 0.3, which is 1 minus 0.7, and that's going to give us our correct answer of 4.05 as the correct answer for this question. The third question type that's probably going to be on your exam are going to be colon questions. They're a little tricky, but here's how to solve them. Taking a look at the answer choices, I can tell this is going to be a clauses question because I can see that there's a period, a semicolon, no punctuation, and a colon, so punctuation changing between the answer choices. But what's particular about colon questions is oftentimes the way to solve them is by using this little trick. I can see that period and a semicolon are both here in the answer choices. Periods and semicolons separate two full sentences. They're actually interchangeable and do the same thing. So when you see both in the answer choices, you can actually get rid of both answer choices because they both can't be right, so they both must be wrong. And now I'm between C and D, and I'm very much leaning towards that colon because this is a pattern for most colon questions. But let's take a look at the passage and see if we satisfy both rules for colons, because colons have two rules. The first rule is that a full sentence must come before a colon. The second rule is that whatever comes after a colon must relate to the topic that came before. And those are the two rules because anything can come after a colon. It can be a full sentence, a fragment, list, or just one word, but let's take a look. A group of ecologists led by Axel Mithofer and Max Planck, Institute of Chemical Ecology in Germany, examined the defensive responses of two varieties of the sweet potato plant. Is that a full sentence? Heck yeah, it is. So we know that the first rule checked off. The full sentence coming before the punctuation right here. Let's take a look at what comes after. TN57, which is known for its insect resistance, and TN66, which is much more susceptible to pests. That looks a heck of a lot like a list to me. And the only punctuation that can separate a full sentence from a list is definitely going to be D, a colon. So D is going to be the correct answer for this question. Number 4, I think you're going to see a tough constants problem that you're going to have to solve with Desmos. Here's how to solve it. First, you're going to want to plug in the equations into Desmos and make sure you hit P to add it as a slider. Next, this question is asking us when do these have no solutions? So that means they're not intersecting. Two parallel lines have the no solution. So that's what we want to do. So looking at it, I want to move this slider so that these lines never touch each other. Let's go ahead and do that. As I move it forward, I can see that they're getting further and further apart, and I know the balance is going to come up soon. I see that as I approach 6, that these no longer touch each other. So whenever you have a problem and it says no solutions, just move that slider until you see that these lines don't touch each other at all. And that's how we know 6 is the correct answer for this question. And you want to double check by make sure you're moving it around and that on these further parts, they're not touching. That's correct. 6 is the correct answer for this question. Fifth, I think you're going to see a tough vocab problem where you might not know what some of the words mean, and you're going to have dense passage, but here's how to solve them. Taking a look at vocabulary problems, you always want to predict your answer. You want to read the passage, predict what goes into the blank, and then compare that prediction to your answer choices. But don't read the passage super fast. You want to read it slowly, understand what's going on. This is going to help you with your prediction and getting the correct answer. So let's go ahead and try it. Some foraging models predict that the distance bees travel when foraging will decline as floral density increases. Okay, so the more flowers there are, the less bees will travel. Makes total sense. But, so we have a nice transition here, you don't want to miss those. Biologists Shalaja and Claire Kremen showed that bees' behavior is inconsistent, so a nice strong word there, with this prediction if flowers in dense patches are blank. So this breaks the rule that they mentioned in the beginning. But our clue here is not to make our prediction quite yet because we see a colon sitting right after. Colons indicate, as the second rule for colons, is that the topic must be shared between the clause coming before the colon and the clause coming after the colon. This means in vocabulary problems that what comes after the colon is actually going to describe what should go into the blank. So let's take a look. Bees will forage beyond patches of low species richness to acquire multiple resource types. So in the beginning, it's saying that bees won't travel far as floral density increases. So the more flowers, the less they travel. But this isn't true because when it's low species richness, they have to go far, probably to get a variety of flowers, which is mentioned here as the multiple resource types. So I'm just summarizing the passage in my own words to make sure I understand it. This helps me with my prediction because I think what I'm going to put in here is something like low diversity. I just want to say something that's similar to low species richness because it makes sense. If it's all the same flower, they're going to have to go and get other flowers. Makes a ton of sense, and it matches the information that comes after the colon. So I'm going to compare low diversity to the rest of my answer choices and take a look. So let's compare it to A, depleted. Does depleted mean low diversity? No, it means we're just out of flowers. Has nothing to do with whether they're the same species or not. So it's not A. Homogeneous, while I know what it means, we're going to pretend like I don't because sometimes you're going to run into an answer choice where you don't know the meaning. But that's not a good reason to get rid of an answer choice, so we're going to leave B for now and maybe get to it through process of elimination. C, immature. Nothing in the passage states whether these flowers are immature or not fully developed. In this case, it has much more to do with low diversity or low species richness, so my prediction doesn't match C. D actually goes against the claim, saying, well, aren't these flowers in dense patches but also dispersed? Doesn't really make a lot of doesn't make a lot of sense because they mean opposite things, so it can't be D either. So it must be B, homogeneous, which also means of low diversity or being the same species, but homogeneous or same. So it actually matches my prediction quite well, so B is going to be the correct answer for this question. The sixth type of question I think you're going to see on the December 6th SAT is going to be a surface area math problem. Here's how to find the surface area of a right rectangular prism. Finding a surface area, you always want to just draw the shape, and this is a good rule for geometry. So let's go ahead and draw this right rectangular prism. To find the surface area of this right rectangular prism, I'm going to have to find the area of all of its sides and then add them together. So let's go ahead and do that, but let's label them with the numbers first. I'm going to say that this is 5, say this is 4, and this is 6. And so what we want to do is find the area of each of the panels and then add them together. In this case, we're going to have different lengths for each. So I can see that there's this panel here, or this side. We're going to need to find the area of it. We find the area of a rectangle by just multiplying the base times the height. So in this case, it's 6 times 4. So that's going to be 24. But what's tricky about these surface area problems is you have to realize there's a back end too. So we have another 24 area panel up in the back. And so we're going to have to multiply this by 2. And we have to add them all together with the rest of the sides. So here we're going to have a 5 by 4 side. So this will be 20. So we're going to add it by 20. But remember, there's 2 of them. So this is another 20. So we're going to make sure to multiply that by 2. And then we're going to have these faces right here. This one right here, where it's 5 by 6. In this case, we're going to multiply 5 by 6 together to get 30. And don't forget, there's 2 of them. So we're going to do it like this. And all of this added together will be something like 40 plus 48 plus 60, which equals 148, which is going to be answer choice D in this case. My 7th prediction is that you're going to see a semicolons in a list grammar problem. Here's how to solve them. You can recognize these by taking a look at the answer choices, as you should for every grammar question, and you're going to see semicolons moving around. So we actually see 2 semicolons there, we see a semicolon here, we see a semicolon here, and none on D. But it's very unusual to see semicolons in that many answer choices, so that's your telltale. It's probably testing semicolons in the list. In addition, if you see a semicolon and in the passage, that's a 100% testing semicolons in the list. Here's how you use a semicolon in a list. So you know how if I had a list of 1, 2, and 3 items, you usually would use a comma to separate each of them. You can also use a semicolon. So in this case, we'd use a semicolon here, and 3. It works the same way as those commas used in the original list that we're all used to. It's a little bit more complex than that, but that's basically the gist. And when you realize it's testing semicolons in the list, you want to go ahead and find the pattern. That's going to tell you which answer choice is correct. You want to look at the other items in the list, see the pattern, and choose the answer that matches. Let's go ahead and do that. Josh Hinson, a director of the Language Revitalization Program of the Chickasaw Nation in Oklahoma, helped produce the world's first indigenous language instructional app, Chickasaw Basic, Chickasaw in 2010, Semicolon. So I see that the semicolon comes after the year, and that right before the year comes a comma. That's telling me a bit of the list. Then I took a look at this last item in the list, and Rosetta Stone language course in Chickasaw, comma, year, period. So once again, it's following the same thing of having a comma and a period ending the item, and then a comma, year, semicolon ending the item. So the pattern here would actually be that it goes maybe like name, comma, year, semicolon. That's our pattern. So let's take a look at the answer choice that matches. Taking a look at A, I see that it goes basic, semicolon, year, comma. That doesn't match what we put down. B, basic, semicolon, year, comma. Once again, same thing as A, not matching. C, basic, comma, year, semicolon. All right, that one works. And then D, basic, comma, year, comma. Nope, doesn't match the pattern. So C has to be the correct answer for this question. My eighth prediction is that you're going to see a unit conversion problem, and it's going to be one of the tricky ones. It's going to ask you for the square yards, square miles, square something. So these are a bit tricky, but here's how to solve them. We want to go ahead and take a look at the question. A certain park has an area of 11,863,808 square yards. What is the area in square miles of this park? And then they give me the conversion here. So what I want to do is actually put them as a fraction. Here's what I mean. So I'm going to take my 11,863,808 square yards. So what this really means is it's yards squared. This is the tricky part. I'm going to put this all over 1. Whenever I want to convert a unit, so in this case it would be yards, into miles, I want to make sure the units cancel out. Here's how you do that. To make sure the units cancel out, I want to get rid of yards and only have miles left over. That tells me I want yards in the denominator, because when I multiply them, both yards are going to cancel out. So in this case, I know that 7,060 yards will go into 1 mile. But this is where most people stop, and this is where they mess up, because there's going to be a trap answer here. Let me show you. If I divide 11,863,808 by 1760, I actually get answer choice D. But answer choice D is not correct, because that's not how you solve this problem. I told you it was tricky. You have to do yards squared to get miles squared. Because remember, we have 2 yards here. We need 2 yards on the denominator. So that means we actually need to do 1760 squared. So what I need to do is divide 11,863,808 by 1760 twice. So let's go ahead and do that. If I do it twice, then I get answer choice B, which is the correct answer for this question. And these yards will cancel out, and I will be left with 3.83 miles squared. My 9th prediction is that you guys are going to see a description, name versus name description question on the December SAT. So here's what that means, and here's how to solve it. So the SAT likes to test essential and non-essential info. Here's what that means. So information necessary for a sentence to function is obviously necessary. It's essential. And information that, if taken out from the passage or sentence, wouldn't change the meaning of it and it would still make sense, that's not necessary. So whenever you have unnecessary or not necessary information, you want to put 2 pieces of punctuation around it. Either it's going to be 2 commas, 2 dashes, or 2 parentheses. In this case, they like to test this in terms of names. So are names necessary or not? Well, names are necessary information. So if you talk about a person and you don't tell me their name and I don't know who they are, the sentence doesn't make any sense. So names, proper nouns, are always necessary info and should not be surrounded by punctuation. So in this case, here's how it's tested. It'll go description, name. So an example of that would be my SAT tutor, Carson. Since the description was SAT tutor before Carson, you're not going to put any punctuation around it because Carson's necessary. But the other way, if I said name description, you would say Carson, comma, my SAT tutor, because that's not necessary. So if I said my SAT tutor Carson's a ginger, you wouldn't put punctuation. But if I said Carson, my SAT tutor, is a ginger, you would put punctuation around my SAT tutor. So you just have to memorize this. So in this case, this is description name because the description's SAT tutor, the name is Carson. And then this is name description. Carson, my SAT tutor, because I could take this out and the sentence would still make sense. But in terms of the SAT, here's what you want to look for. When you take a look at the answer choices, as you should for all grammar questions, you're going to see that there's probably going to be a proper noun surrounded by punctuation in different parts. We see a comma here, and 2 commas here, and no punctuation down here. And that tells me it's probably testing name, description, description, name. So I want to take a look in the passage of what order it's occurring. Is the description coming before the name or after? Let's take a look. I'm going to ignore the first sentence and start here. Critics have noted that the way pioneering playwright Wakako Yamuchi compares the experiences. So in this case, the description is pioneering playwright. And then the name is Wakako Yamuchi. So I know it's going description to a name, and that means no punctuation. So in this case, I know I can't put a comma separating the description from the name, so I know it can't be A, and I know it can't be B. But in this case, C is still a viable option, and so is D. I want to take a look at what's occurring after the blank. If you guys see a verb coming after the blank anywhere on the SAT grammar passages, you want to make sure you're not splitting a subject and a verb with one piece of punctuation. So in this case, what is comparing the experiences? Wakako Yamuchi is comparing the experiences, and we cannot separate a subject from its verb with one piece of punctuation, so that's why C is incorrect, and D has to be the correct answer for this question. My 10th and final prediction is that you're going to get a tough circle problem, and I think it's going to be testing the sector ratios. Here's what they are, and here's how to solve this problem. So first, I'm going to draw a circle. I'm going to show you the different parts of it. So if you don't know what the sector ratios are, you kind of need to know what a sector is in order to solve these. So imagine if I had a circle and I took a little pizza slice out of it. You're going to have what's here. And this is what they're going to refer to as the interior angle of a circle. So that's your interior angle. Then you're going to have the sector area. And so what this pizza slice is going to be your sector. The area is that cheesy part. So that's going to be your sector area, right? And then we're going to have the crust. The crust is going to be the arc length. And the great thing about circles and what creates this ratio in the first place is that they're proportional. So proportionally, the interior angle should be the same as the arc length and the same as the sector area. But here's how to solve them. So I'm going to show you a formula and memorize it and write it down. Super important and super easy for some hard points. If I have an interior angle and I divide it by all the angles of a circle, it's going to be equal to my sector area divided by the entire area of a circle. And guess what? That's going to be equal to my arc length, so my pizza crust, divided by the entire pizza crust of the circle, which is the circumference. So the interior angle over 360 is equal to the sector area over the area, which is equal to the arc length over the circumference. So what this means is if I'm given the interior angle and the sector area, I can find the area of a circle. Or if I'm given the interior angle and the arc length, I can find the circumference of a circle pretty easily through this relationship. So let's go ahead and take what we learned and apply it to this question. A circle has center O and the points A, B lie on the circle. With all geometry problems, you want to go ahead and draw it. So we have center O and then we have A and B. The measure of arc AB is 45 degrees. Okay, so let me draw it. So this arc is 45 degrees. And the length of the arc is 3 inches. So if the measure of the arc is 45 degrees, that means the interior angle is also 45 degrees. So in this case, we're actually given the interior angle pretty indirectly by telling us the measure of the arc in degrees. Just happen to memorize that also the interior angle is the same as the arc length in degrees, but they also give us the arc length in inches as well, which will help us solve this problem. So we're going to go ahead and use the ratio. So we're going to take 45 degrees divided by 360, and we're going to set it equal to the arc length, which is 3, over, guess what, the circumference. So doing this, we can actually pretty quickly, by cross multiplying, find the circumference of the entire circle. So if I go ahead and cross multiply, I get 45 times x, which will replace our circumference, for 3 times 360. So if I divide both sides by 45, I get x equals 24. So D will be the correct answer for this question. Those are my 10 predictions for the upcoming December 6th SAT. If you enjoyed this video and you're planning on taking an SAT after December 6th SAT, sign up for my free SAT score plan in the pinned comment below. I'll work with you one-on-one to help you develop an SAT study plan to fit your goals so you can raise your score 200 plus points and get your dream SAT score. But I do take a limited amount of spots per week, so make sure you get yours now before they fill.